Welcome to Two Pentecostals and a Microphone, episode 18. Welcome back to Two Pentecostals and a Microphone. I'm one of your hosts, Bryce Kyle. I hope that you all had a wonderful Christmas and a Happy New Year. Both Jared and I did, and we're really glad to be back and get back to a regular schedule with our episodes. Today is going to be a controversial episode about gun control. And this was just a reaction to the Sutherland Springs, Texas church shooting. Very tragic event. And we recorded this a couple months ago, pretty much right after that happened. And today we're going to talk about whether or not it's okay for a member of the church to carry a gun inside the church in hopes to stop a gunman from coming in. Jared and I have different viewpoints on this, and we discuss it today. Hope you enjoy this episode.
Okay, so we're talking about gun control.
Dun, dun, dun. I need to make that sound effect.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Gun control, but I don't think necessarily in a political sense. My thinking is, should a member of church be allowed to carry weapons into the church?
Okay. That's a good question. I have not a counter question. I have another question too.
Okay.
Is how should Christians discuss politics around gun control? So we're not really concerned with the politics of gun control.
Right.
So much as how do Christians approach it?
Right.
And should we, or is there a benefit to somebody concealed carrying a gun in church?
Yeah. I think those are both really great questions, and we need to have a dialogue and conversation about it for sure.
Definitely. I think this is the problem when you start talking about things like guns. You get very emotional reactions from both sides.
Right.
So there's one side of and there's more than two sides, obviously, but there are two very polarizing sides,
right,
that are very vocal. And one is completely anti-guns all the time, or most of the time. And one is completely pro-guns all the time, or most of the time. I was involved. Okay, so I was involved in the NRA as an NRA member. I wasn't really I had a hat, it was free, but I wasn't preaching the NRA gospel or anything like that. But I was a member for a long time. And honestly, I finally let my membership lapse because they just call me all the time and ask for more money.
Right.
I pay my dues. I don't know what they want from me, but a lot of the people, in that world, and I consider myself still to be a supporter of the Second Amendment, and I own guns, and maybe we'll talk about some of those experiences. Yours is very different.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't grow up with guns.
No.
But I did. And I consider myself to be, kind of in that group in a way. But the problem is in that group of Second Amendment supporters and, the real gun guys, the guys who know about guns, who are all about the culture and they know all about it. And in that culture, it's just, you don't talk about it. You don't ask questions. It's my way or the highway. If you're not for me, you're against me. Any question of, is a gun appropriate here, meaning in a hospital or a school or a church, is sacrilege because the gun is always appropriate.
Right.
Now, there's the other side of the equation too. And the other group, being completely anti-gun, doesn't want to have this conversation either because a gun is never appropriate.
Yeah.
And usually you get pretty strong responses from those two sides, and you don't hear a lot of the more moderate opinions.
Right. I actually am personally fit into the moderate category. I am okay with people owning guns. I don't own a gun, and I never have. Doesn't mean I'm against them. Doesn't mean I'm against the Second Amendment, so don't be go writing emails and letters and whatever. Sending me hate mail.
I'm gonna find the new co-host for this show.
Yeah. And I'm not going to impede on anyone's right. I believe in the Second Amendment.
Right.
I believe it was there for a reason, and it serves its purpose. And I do think there are extremes on both ends, obviously. And to me, that's not necessarily right. I do take a middle of the road approach, and I think a lot of people look down on that too. But
yeah, a lot of people do.
Yeah, and it's usually the one side or the other.
On the extremists.
Yeah.
A lot. I think extremes on most issues, the extremes are not healthy and probably not helpful in the conversation. And then a lot of people, probably the majority, fall into those two extremes, or maybe they're just a really loud minority. I don't know.
Yeah.
But to them, moderation, the moderate middle ground, is just compromise, and it's not acceptable.
Yeah. I can see that. And, it doesn't mean that I would never own a gun. I can see myself owning a gun. I can see myself, like, I enjoy meat. So I would like to hunt sometime.
Mm-hmm.
I just never had that in my family. There's no hunters in my family at all.
Right.
And to what I know. But I can see the appeal of it, and I hear the stories, and I like them.
Right.
And I can't see myself climbing a tree and sitting in a tree stand for hours.
I'm not climbing a tree.
Yeah.
I'm scared of heights, so I'm out.
But I also kind of I would like more of the sport of it, because to me, a gun kind of, I don't know, it's like NASCAR, racing. What's the point?
Right.
But, I want to be like a Native American hunter with a spear and go out there and actually kill someone.
Boar hunting or something with a spear, that's a whole other level of manliness.
Right. And so, as in the art of manliness, I would want to be the full-fledged hunter.
Right. Make your own bow and arrows and...
Like that appeals to me more than going out with a gun and shooting.
I think primitive hunting, as far as hunting goes, primitive hunting is really interesting.
Yeah,
and I think it would be definitely more interesting than hunting with a gun.
And on the flip side of that, I can also see gun being used for protection.
Right.
I played this scenario out with my wife the other day because I was talking to her about this very episode and my thoughts on it, and. I brought up the scenario that, because she's like anti-gun, big time, and she has no desire to ever be around one.
But has she ever been around one?
I think she's told me she shot some guns in the past.
Really?
And I don't know if she liked it or not, but I've shot guns, and I understand the appeal of them.
Right.
They are powerful, and they're cool.
The cool factor, and so that's true. You can't ignore the cool factor. Right. I mean, there's a reason why action movies. The guys always have these cool guns, and I don't know. It's
and some of my favorite. Speaking of fictional or movies, and some of my favorite characters in fiction are gun wielders.
Right.
And so it's like. My favorite all-time fictional character is Indiana Jones, and I love the scene,
with the guy with the sword.
Yeah, in Raiders of the Lost Ark, yes. And all he does is Harrison Ford just looks at him like whatever, then picks up his gun and shoots him.
Bang! Just walks away.
That's brilliant, right?
That is a brilliant scene.
Yeah, But and so, I have nothing against it, and like I said, I understand the appeal of it, the cool factor of it. But I was talking to my wife, and I brought up the scenario because she's, like I said, anti-gun. But I said, what if someone breaks into our home and pulls a gun on my head, and you have a gun in your nightstand?
Mm-hmm. How anti-gun are you then?
Right.
Yeah.
When it comes to loved ones, I think sometimes we have the knee jerk. I think she's worried about killing someone, more or less having the gun.
An accident or something like that.
But even in that scenario, having the choice to actually take another life.
Oh, right.
And I brought up, we can shoot in a limb or something, just get the guy down, but not necessarily kill him. But I think that's her biggest issues with it. They are tools that allow people to kill people.
Right.
There's always the argument, guns don't kill people, people kill people. Yes, that's true. But guns make it a lot easier.
Right. Oh, it makes it very easy.
Yeah.
And, I think, this is different than what we're talking about, but I do think about like the wholesale slaughter of Native Americans, for example, in certain instances, or in Africa in different instances where there were people facing like a Gatling gun with a spear,
right. Yeah,
and no understanding of what that thing was capable of, and it's wholesale slaughter when compared to an edged weapon, but it's progress too.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think worse yet is nuclear war, so I mean, it just scales up. It's scaling up.
Right.
So yeah, a gun is a tool, absolutely useful in many, many different ways. But they are, they're very dangerous.
Right.
And obviously in the wrong hands, it makes murder easy.
Right. And, for the gun advocates out there, and, I include myself in this opinion, is, you're never going to get rid of gun violence.
No.
I think, you could take guns out of the complete equation, out of people's hands. There's someone out there that's going to find a way to get one.
Right. And violence is always going to be a problem.
Yeah.
If you could invent a time machine and go back and never have guns at all.
Right.
Violence would still be a problem.
Yeah. And I know it's cliche, but it is a heart issue with people. It
really is.
And so,
or
whether they have a gun
issue,
right? Yeah,
in some cases,
yeah. Whether you have a gun or a blunt object of something, or a rock, or
a pointy stick, a knife, whatever.
Yeah, they're going to find a way to commit this violence and the heinous crimes they do. I wanted to bring up what happened recently, and it seems like every time you turn on the news, there's some other mass shooting, and we've talked about it briefly before with what happened in Las Vegas, but I want to talk specifically what happened in Texas recently.
That's absolutely heartbreaking.
Yeah,
I mean, like at the highest level. And not just because it's a church and we can relate to it because, fellow Christians or whatever, but just on a humanity level. I mean, in the story, I believe what was the town? It was a small town.
Springs.
It was a small town in
Texas.
And the stories that I've heard are just heartbreaking. For example, the pastor and his wife not being there when it happened, but their daughter being killed.
Yeah.
I can't begin to imagine. This is a tiny little town.
Yeah.
From the news reports I heard, they said because it's so small, literally everyone in town will have lost someone close to them.
Right.
Because half this congregation was killed.
Yeah.
And it's just mind-boggling to me. And I think about from the pastor and his wife from their perspective. I can't think of it's hard to think of a harder, of a worse situation, of something harder to deal with than that. And it's, it depends on who you ask. It's because of hatred. It's because of, somebody who's just crazy. It's because of, it's a sin problem, a heart problem. It's because of a gun.
Right.
It depends on who you talk to. But the situation is just beyond terrible.
It is. It's horrible. I think any gun violence, any mass shooting, the church made it a really, really difficult situation. But I think any mass shooting, it's terrible.
It is.
So, it's interesting to me. I know it's Texas, so I guarantee they had people that could carry in that
Oh, I'm
church.
sure
Yeah,
I have no doubt in my mind that there are people there with a concealed carry permit. But
yeah,
whether actually, I think though Texas, I don't know if Texas changed that or not. I believe they used to have a law against concealed carry, and it was open carry only, which is
okay,
strange.
yeah,
But I want to say that was the case. But at any rate, I'm sure there were people who did carry.
yeah,
Whether or not they were carrying then is a question.
right. So it's hard to say because what happened, what happened. We can only just play out different scenarios in our minds, but if there was someone carrying, could that person have stopped them from killing more? That's always the question, I think,
Right.
and that's the reason why we carry, or why we say we carry anyway, if we ever got into a situation like that. Should a church allow their members to carry weapons inside inside a church service? And I would go as far as say, should there be a gun underneath the pulpit?
Right. And at different times in our history,
Yeah.
actually probably now in some churches that's the case.
Right.
Um, I have very mixed feelings on this, considering that a year ago I would have considered myself a gun guy, and like in every sense of the word. Like I love, reading gun magazines, and I'm watching Hickok 45 or whoever, on YouTube, and these guys doing these demonstrations and stuff. And I like to shoot guns, and I still fall in that category to some degree. I'm not as excited about it as I used to be. And I maybe my attention's somewhere else now, but actually I'm really strongly considering buying a new gun on Black Friday or around Black Friday when there's some good deals. I'm kind of excited that Glock has a single stack 9mm, for example, because it's a nice little narrow 9mm,
Yeah.
and it's a Glock. So anyway, so I still am a gun guy, but not to the degree that I was before. But so I'm really torn on this. Shortly after, and I wish I had written it down. I'm going to start doing a dream journal, I think, because I think it's interesting what you dream. And to me, dreaming is interesting because it's your unconscious mind trying to work through problems that your conscious mind hasn't figured out yet.
Right.
And it's not mystical necessarily. It's just you trying to figure it out when you're asleep. It's pretty crazy.
Yep.
And so right after this incident in Texas, I had a dream about a shooting, and I can't remember the details. So, hence the need to do a dream journal. But I can't remember the details clearly. But I remember being in a scenario where there was a shooting going on. I believe it was in a church in this dream, and afterward, just feeling just sick about it, like walking out the doors and just feeling like completely lost. And I was like, I'm almost like I was able to feel, I can't, not that I can imagine it, what the emotions like of being involved or being there when something happens like this, but it felt like what I can only imagine it feels like walking out the doors after something like that happened. And I just remember this strange feeling, and I woke up, I felt guilty about it, being a pro Second Amendment guy and being a kind of a gun guy. I almost felt guilty because my thought in waking up, my thought was, I really couldn't care less if I ever touch a gun again in my life.
Wow.
And it was a really strange feeling because I've never felt that before.
Yeah.
Because my knee-jerk reaction, and actually even if I stop and think about it using logic, it seems right to me that having a gun and being a good, sane person is a good idea.
Yeah.
And that I would be better equipped to help stop something like that if it did happen. And I still feel that way when I think about it logically, for the most part. But what I find interesting is the fact that I was willing to just, in that moment at least, I felt like I was willing to just drop it. And I think after thinking about it, and I actually did spend a lot of time thinking about this, because I was like, this idea of, nonviolence is complete nonviolence in any scenario is something that's been very much a part of the Christian tradition for different groups for a long time, Anabaptists and the Amish and even more mainstream denominations. And actually, part of UPCI,
right.
When I went to get my license, one of my issues I had was the idea of not being of if I had to go to war, or whatever, join the military, if I was drafted, being what is it?
Conscientious objector.
Conscientious objector. Yeah, exactly. So I didn't compute with me. I couldn't figure that one out. But so I know it's a common theme in a lot of Christianity, but for me it just didn't feel right. And then, but in that moment, I thought, what really matters? Me and my gun, or somebody else's life? Now that doesn't. I don't think logically that really makes a lot of sense, because as a responsible, sane gun owner, and I think of myself as a fairly good guy, I'm not gonna be the one to do something like that.
Sure.
And in this dream, I wasn't. But it was just like the whole. I think what it is, the whole culture at its most extreme turned me off. Like, I realized in that moment that the extreme right wing, we're never going to have this discussion. You're not taking my guns. That it's more about the attitude, and it's more about the elevated level of priority, I guess, that guns get for some people. It's a problem.
Yeah.
It's an idol.
Yeah.
Basically.
Pretty much.
I read, if you've read Kyle Idleman's book, Gods at War, right?
Yeah.
This is a perfect example of it. And a lot of my friends who are Christians and really pro Second Amendment need to stop and think about this. Because I did after this incident, for whatever reason. Maybe it's because it was a shooting combined and with a good guy with a gun who helped bring it to an end at the end.
Yeah.
And in the church. All these things were rolling around in my head, and I started thinking about it in terms of Kyle Idleman's book. Is this an idol for me? And I can absolutely say without any doubt that at one point in my life, I had, probably 20 guns in my safe, and not that there's anything wrong with that,
right?
Necessarily, but I spent an inordinate amount of time watching gun videos, reading gun magazines, buying guns, going to gun stores, shooting guns. It was like talking about them. It became, I think, was it C.S. Lewis who referred to it as disordered loves? I believe it was C.S. Lewis who said that. I may be wrong, but it was that in my life. It was something I loved that was out of order in priority, and it became an idol to me. And I can say that about a lot of things in my life.
Right. I think that's good advice for pretty much everyone to take a look at, what is taking priority in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Not just guns, but in my case would be like guitars.
Yeah. It was just music in general for me when I was younger.
Right. And so it's like, I'm obsessed with guitars. And those that know me, I own several of them. And I own several other instruments as well. But it's like, that takes pretty high priority on my list.
And it's kind of similar to guns. They have the real cool factor.
Right.
We
refer to them as axes.
Right. Yeah.
Kind of a weapon, so to speak.
Yeah. Sonic weapon.
Yeah. Anyway.
So there's definitely a correlation there.
Yeah. So I think that's good advice for everyone to just take a moment, think about, those things, and really try to reprioritize what's really important.
Right.
And in our case, we're talking about guns. Should that be 1, 2, 3, even 7, 8, 9, 10 on our list,
Right.
As far as it comes to, our relationship with God and our relationship to others and so forth.
Ooh, now while you're on that subject, you really touched on something important, I think, right there. This is one of my major issues with, and this is for our listeners who are on either side of the issue, but I find it because we're in such a conservative Christian movement,
Right.
and we're in such a conservative area of Southern Indiana. I think we see it a lot more on the pro-gun side.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there's listeners of ours who are on both sides of the issue. So either way, think about how you speak and act about it.
Right.
Because how does your not your stance. I believe in having opinions on political issues. I believe in having opinions. This is a free country. I think it's a wonderful thing.
Right.
I'm not talking about having your opinion, but I'm talking about the way that you relate it.
Mm-hmm.
How is it affecting your ability to carry out the mission of the cross?
Absolutely.
How does your opinion, when relayed through social media or to people face to face or however it is, especially on social media, because we have no filters,
right?
How does it affect your ability to reach the lost? For example, if you are pro Second Amendment, I mean, you're a gun guy. You're one of the, you like I, was at one point in my life where that's what I thought about most of the time. And you have a knee-jerk reaction and you start liberal bashing on Facebook and talking about how ignorant. And I saw, there was something hilarious, by the way, that USA Today put out. And it was like it was like a drawing, like a line drawing or something of the gun, that this guy used in Texas and the attachments that could be used on it. And, they're trying to scare people. I mean, it's an AR-15, it's a semi-automatic version of an M16, pretty much. It's a semi-automatic rifle. It can be used for anything, hunting, military. Military won't use it because it doesn't have, the M16 is full auto option. Anyway, but it could be used for anything, really.
Sure.
But, they show, the thing they chose to show was a chainsaw attachment. You see that?
Yeah.
Okay. It's like, you can get a rocket launcher to go on the bottom, but they're not available at Bass Pro.
Right.
I guess this thing actually exists, this chainsaw that mounts into your AR-15. I don't know what in the world you would use it for.
We're going through some really thick jungle.
Yeah, I guess, cutting some brush while you hunt. Although you're going to chase away any game in the area because of the noise of the chainsaw. A zombie apocalypse, I can see that,
That's true.
if you were filming it.
Yeah.
Because really the chainsaw would only be useful for visual impact.
Yeah.
It's not really practical.
No.
So I don't know. It was fear mongering is what it was.
Yeah.
So it's kind of laughable. And I did on social media, I have to admit, I commented on that and I laughed and I said, I think what I said was, I tagged USA Today and I said, this morning I didn't know that chainsaw attachments for an AR-15 existed, and today all I want is a chainsaw attachment for an AR-15. Yeah. But anyway, the moral of the story is how you. So I tried it. I laughed about it, and it's because it was funny, but I try not to be divisive or mean spirited because you can. I mean, it's easy to have that knee-jerk reaction and say, you stupid liberals, or if you're on the other side, these crazy gun nuts, and either one's totally unproductive in general,
right?
Toward the conversation and society's conversation of this, but it's also going to pretty seriously hamper your ability to reach somebody with the gospel.
And I want to add to that too, because in the previous episode we had Pastor Arrowwood on with us, and he told us a story off the air, so I won't repeat it, but he told us a story about something that happened and how it's reflecting the church.
Right.
And so
possibly reflecting badly but totally unwarranted.
Right. And totally taken out of context. Mm-hmm. And so when a member of a church gets on Facebook and does the said bashing we're talking about, and the divisive talk against one group or another, how is that reflecting the body of Christ as a whole? It's putting a negative spin on our church. First of all, they're a member of such and such church. I'm not going to go there. So we've just totally lost that person completely just off some stupid we put on Facebook.
Exactly.
And I may not even know them personally. Maybe they're questioning things about coming to that church.
Right.
You never
They may
know.
be a friend of a friend who happens to see it.
Right.
it's disconcerting to me that, and here's the issue, and I'm actually working on the very early stages of a book on the subject of politics in the church, and I worry that even patriotism is in the church is a problem because it's taken to the level of ultranationalism too easily, and definitely politics, party line politics, and things are damaging to the church, and they're destroying the church in some cases.
Right.
But I think this is a case again where it's not about guns; it's about identity politics, and it's about bashing the group that I perceive as being opposed to my group.
Right.
And when you make it us versus them, regardless of what the issue is, regardless of the context, anytime it's us versus them, it for one thing, it dehumanizes the other group, and that's why we think in those terms.
Yeah, we
don't think in terms of another person with a different point of view. We think in terms of, for example, if you're conservative, a really conservative person in your values and your politics, you don't think of Susie so and so or whatever. Or, you think of liberals,
right?
And there's this archetype maybe in your mind, but it's not a real person. You're talking about a group, because a group is not a person, and you dehumanize them. And dehumanizing anybody for any reason is always dangerous.
Exactly.
And that's what identity politics does. And it digs your heels in and fights without thought for the damage done.
Right. Both sides do it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Again, I use the conservative example a lot of times just because I see it so much in our area. But absolutely, both sides do it.
Yeah.
All the time.
Right.
It is the state of politics. It's like the zeitgeist right now. It's like, this is what defines our time, maybe more than other times at least in the recent history.
Yeah.
Is this just vitriol that you see from it's hatred from one group for the other. It's sad.
All right.
But it's leaking into the church.
Yeah, most definitely.
You asked, should we have a gun in the church?
Yeah.
Is that the question?
Yes, that was the original.
Okay, still a good question. My opinion?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay, let's give an example. Our church, we have an armed police officer.
Yeah.
Or a sheriff.
Yeah.
Who kind of patrols.
In uniform.
Yeah.
With a gun.
He's definitely in uniform. You can see the whole 9 yards that is involved in that.
Yeah.
And he kind of sits in the back of the church,
and he takes, every now and then he'll walk through the halls or the foyer and up into the balcony. And
I see that need, but
I do. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And very much.
And, I appreciate it in the sense that I feel protected.
Mm-hmm.
But my wife brought up a really good point, and after talking to her about it, and I really, really see her point. Okay, for instance, we're having a program in our church, and I briefly talked about it in the podcast in the previous episodes, but the TLC program,
right,
Touching Lives for Christ, we're wanting to bring in more people that we can reach.
Mm-hmm.
We're wanting to bring in, to have converts, and it's a numbers game at the same time, but it's really about that one person that we can get to church.
Yeah, it's about connecting with people. Yeah. Exactly.
And so the types of people that we connect are the type of people we see every day. Maybe, for instance, in your situation with the detention center, all right, someone gets out of the detention center and, you want to get them in church. So they come to church and the first thing they see
is a cop.
It's a cop.
And maybe the one that arrested them.
Right.
I think you never know. Well, I think the thing is, Scott is a really nice guy.
Right. There's nothing against Scott.
No, I know.
I think it's more
what is the perception when they walk in the door? It sets the tone.
Right.
Yeah. And I think it would be harder for some guys, but he is very personable. He's just a kind of jovial kind of guy,
Yeah.
And I'm sure when he has to be, he's hard, on the job. Sometimes you have to do that, but he's very much, happy, welcoming, probably says hi to everybody,
Yeah.
joking around, he's that kind of guy. So I'm sure that softens it a little bit, but seeing that uniform when they walk in for some
Right. I
people.
think it's going to build up the anxiety
Mhm.
and maybe make them not feel as welcome.
Right.
And Sandra brought up her brother,
Mhm.
and if he's listening to this, I apologize, but um, he's had some issues with police in the past,
Mhm.
and he has this anxiety.
Mhm.
And
I think a lot of people have an anxiety around police officers,
Right.
even if it's not really warranted necessarily.
right,
I mean, it's always stressful,
yeah,
if you're dealing with a cop,
and he deals with some different things, and to add on to that stress with a uniformed police officer in the back,
Right.
kind of just patrolling.
Yeah.
What it looks like. It doesn't look like he's from the outside. It doesn't look like he's taking part in the actual service, but he's just kind of patrolling the grounds, so
Right.
to speak. And I know why he's there, and and I know the purpose of it, but others are not going to see it that way.
Right.
And so it's going to build up this anxiety. Do I want him there? Absolutely.
Yeah, I know. I see both sides of it.
Yeah. And, obviously, not even just as a police officer, but as a member of the church.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I feel better having knowing he's there. Not everybody will. But then again,
maybe not in uniform.
Right.
He could still do what he does, but hide it.
Right.
And,
it's one of these things that I think what it comes down to. And I see what Sandra is saying. I think it has merit.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I also think that it's a matter of there's no solution that makes everybody happy either.
There's not. Because
there's going to be a lot of people that walk in and see that and they feel really good about it. So.
Well, at the same time, though, let's say we didn't have Brother Davis. Let's say we just allowed members to carry in the church.
Mm-hmm.
So we got, a juvenile delinquent or someone, that's had issues in the past come in that may have a little anxiety around that. And then we got members stroking their guns in the pews.
Right. Yeah. This brings up a really interesting issue because the reality of the situation is in Seymour, Indiana, I can guarantee on a given Sunday, there are multiple people in our church that are carrying.
Yeah.
And nobody knows.
Right.
So there's no way, even if you say, we're concerned that somebody's going to, overreact to the situation and somebody's going to get hurt, because there's always a danger. There's always a danger that somebody's going to be overly, cautious or whatever, and they're too excitable or whatever, and they overreact.
Yeah.
And they shoot somebody, or God forbid, or even just pull out a gun, in a situation that doesn't warrant it. That's terrible. It's worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Other than, a church shooting, a mass church shooting or something. But maybe in some ways even worse because, you don't want that. But on the other hand, you don't know. I mean, what are you going to do? Pat everybody down when they come in? Right. And make sure they're not carrying? I tend to lean toward, this is just my personal opinion. I hate the idea of guns in the church for several reasons. You could probably figure that one out. But I feel like security the safety of the church members and visitors is extremely important too. And I feel like having a few well-trained people who are carrying on the down low, obviously very concealed, not flashing it, well-trained in that they know how to operate the piece of machinery in their pocket or in their...
And they have the psychology too.
Yes, because you don't want somebody who's going to jump the gun and freak out and start shooting people, You don't want, the cowboy who's just like, as soon as he sees something off, he's ready to, quick draw and just start taking people out. I think, in my opinion, the only scenario where it would be acceptable to draw a weapon, and this is away from, just the carrying, but to draw a weapon and have to use it in any sense is the situation where someone has drawn their weapon. I don't think that some shady guy that gives you the creeps, or is reaching in his pocket or is, it's anything else is acceptable. Right. I think, and that's just in general, not even in church, but just in general. I've talked to a friend of mine who's a police officer, and he does undercover. He's been undercover quite a bit the last few years, but he's been a police officer probably for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years now, 7 or 8 years maybe, with the Indiana State Police. And we've discussed, carrying, because I have a concealed carry permit, and I've not carried in a long time, but we've discussed it. And one of the things that he said is, you should only draw your weapon if you have to shoot somebody.
Yeah.
And this is very cut and dry, and it's scary to somebody who doesn't want, like Sandra, this fear of having to actually hurt somebody.
Right.
Or God forbid, kill somebody. And the solution to that is not a very good emotional solution, but logically it makes sense. And he says, you only draw your weapon if you have to shoot somebody. So you don't draw it and tell them to stop, And generally speaking, if you're a concealed carry person, you don't draw until there's an actual danger. Like, you don't just draw because somebody's giving you the creeps or somebody's getting too close up in your space or they punch you even. I'm only going to draw a gun if they draw a gun or if they try and lunge at me with a knife,
Yeah.
And in that instance, it should be escalated to the point where I have to shoot them.
Yeah, you should be prepared to take that action.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, we talk about shooting somebody in the limb or something, and that's ideal, I think. It'd be ideal to be able to wound somebody and stop them.
Right.
But in the reality of the situation, and this is something I talked to him about as well, because I had that question, would it be good to just try to wound somebody? And his answer was, no, you need to shoot him in the chest. And I'm thinking, it sounds kind of terrible. I don't want to have to do that, but he explained why, and the reason, it makes sense. The reason is being that your heart rate's elevated, you're stressed, your palms are sweaty, your vision's not clear.
The easiest target.
The easiest target. And the one that's most likely to stop them.
Right.
And that's center mass.
Yeah.
And that's the unfortunate thing is that they could very easily die.
Yeah.
But the good thing is that if they are actually in your house or, God forbid, in your church with a gun,
mm-hmm.
they are most likely not going to be able to hurt you after a couple of rounds to the chest. And that's the worst case scenario. I can't imagine having to do that. And I pray that never happens.
And, I think that gives me another comfort that we have Brother Davis. Mm-hmm. So I would never be put in a situation where I have to do that.
Right. I would hate to be in that situation.
Yeah. So I like the fact that I know that there are people that are capable of doing that.
I mean, the thing that scares me is there are some. This is. I don't want to paint broad strokes here.
Yeah.
But I know the guys in this gun guy club. It's like there are some gun guys who are excited by the thought of getting to shoot somebody.
See,
that scares me.
The psychology comes in.
Right.
And, I think that's the biggest difference between a police officer and a lay person, so to speak.
Exactly.
Or civilian. But
so I think when it comes down to it, I feel good having, me personally, I feel good having Scott there. I understand why some people would be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So, I think we need to take that in consideration, obviously.
Right.
I would feel good knowing there were some guys, and I think this is true of every gun owner. I think if you're going to own a gun, learn how to use it.
Yeah.
Too many people buy one and think it's cool, and their buddies have them, and they get one and they don't know how to use it. That's a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely.
Learn how to use it. Learn it inside and out. You should be able to use it. I wouldn't recommend using it in your sleep, but you should basically be able to use it in your sleep.
If someone breaks in, you should be in the dark. You should be able to grab that gun, load it, whatever you have to do.
It needs to be second nature.
Yeah, exactly.
It needs to be second nature. It needs to be fast. It needs to be, and then so there you go again with putting time. You're gonna have to devote some time to it.
Yeah.
I don't think you should obsess over it, but you should spend time. You're gonna have to spend time at the range. You're gonna have to shoot thousands of rounds probably through that specific gun before you get comfortable enough to be able to use it in a stressful situation effectively.
Right. Yeah.
So, and it's actually fun. Going to the shooting range is fun. For me, at least. Obviously, for some people, it's not.
An expensive habit.
It is a very expensive habit.
Yeah. Or
yeah.
hobby. I mean, expensive hobby.
Yeah, expensive hobby. I think. Limiting it is. I had to. I was spending too much money on ammunition. And then I had one gun that was fun to shoot, and it was a big, huge revolver. Actually, my brother-in-law bought it for me. It's made by Taurus, and it's called the Judge, and it's this big, massive revolver that shoots you shoot a 410 slug through it if you want, or it'll shoot a 45 long Colt. Either way, it's like $1 a round to shoot. And I had to just quit shooting it because it's too expensive. And I had a 9mm. I don't have it anymore, but I had a 9mm that I could shoot a lot cheaper. It wasn't quite as much fun, but
yeah.
But anyway, I don't know. It's something that if you are a gun owner, period, you need to take it very seriously.
Yeah.
I think you should get some training from somebody who knows what they're doing. You should make sure if you're the kind of person who isn't exactly 100% stable and you're self-aware enough to know that, then don't own one.
Right.
I don't think everybody should have one. And as far as churches go, it's touchy. It's really touchy. But I would much rather. It's the best of two bad options, is what it is. But I would much rather have a gunman dead than 50 people in the congregation.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's what it boils down to.
Mm-hmm.
But I think with a properly trained person, not just every single member in the church.
Not just the guy who's the most excited and comes up and says, hey,
yeah,
can I start carrying the church? Yeah, that's probably the guy you don't want doing it.
Yeah. And I don't even know necessarily having, like, I made the joke about having the gun in the pulpit, where the pastor's obviously going to be the first one to see someone walk in.
That's true. That is true.
So,
I do feel like it's one of those things.
Picture the sawed-off shotgun behind the bar.
You're right. Just put it on a swivel under the pulpit and it's ready to go all the time.
Yeah.
And then there's stories of, and there was a missionary. I wish I could remember names. I've heard these stories told by missionaries, and I've remembered them, but not in detail. But there was one, I think it was in South America, where a guy walked up to the pastor of a church. He was sitting on the steps of this church, and somewhere in Latin America, and pulled out a gun and pointed at the preacher's face and pulled the trigger. And it I don't know what you'd call it. Was evidently it was reloaded cartridge, and it was loaded too light, or it was a miracle, however you want to look at it. But it fired, and the pastor caught the bullet in his teeth. He said, actually, what happened was he said Jesus as soon as the guy pulled the gun, and at the same time the guy fired, and the bullet literally stopped between his teeth and fell down on the steps. And the guy, starts, speaking Spanish, whatever he said, probably, praying most likely, and ran off because he was scared. Because he just saw the preacher catch the gun in his teeth. So, and then a story, I think it was, I want to say in the former Soviet Union, where a preacher was, they were going to kill him, and they came in and shot up the pulpit and him, and with an AK-47, and he had bullet holes in his suit and not a scratch on it.
Wow.
And it's like, there's a trusting God, and then there's common sense.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's, there's an instance in the Bible, and I don't want to misquote it because it just popped in my head. Okay, the story of Nehemiah, who goes back to Jerusalem to rebuild the walls.
Yeah.
There's this line that I think kind of sums it up in a lot of ways, and that's to pray to God and set a guard. So, basically, I'm really paraphrasing here, but the idea is pray, trust God, but don't forget to set a guard. And I'm assuming that these were armed guards.
Right.
And so they trusted God, but they were still diligent and vigilant.
Right. Well, I think that's in the will of God as well. I don't think God expects us to just, yes, he does want us to fully rely on him, But in every situation, if someone comes at me with a gun, I don't know, will I have enough grace or enough faith to believe that I'm going to dodge a bullet here?
Well, I think there's a fine line between trusting God and testing God.
Right.
And he expects us to have enough common sense to do some things on our own.
I know we talked about grace a lot in the previous episode, and Pastor Airwood brought up the point that it's the safety net.
Right.
We're walking on the high wire. That's our work, I guess, going from point A to point B, and their faith is the balance.
Right.
But we have all of that stuff. So we're expected to walk across the line.
But there's still a net.
But there's still a safety net. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks for listening today on Two Pentecostals and a Microphone. I hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as Jared and I did. I think both of us would agree that there's no easy answers to this issue. It is such a heated debate in politics and in the home, everywhere we go. This is a big issue, and everyone has their knee-jerk reaction immediately after this happens, after a tragedy like this happens. All we can do, and I feel it is probably the best solution to reach a lost and dying community for the grace of God. We need to go out and reach our neighbors, our friends, our co-workers, our family, as much as we can for the gospel of Christ. I think that's what's really going to make an impact on people's lives. Whether or not you own a gun, or whether or not you believe in owning guns or not owning guns or want to ban them all, it doesn't matter. All that matters in the end is whether or not they're going to make it to heaven. And the only way we're going to do that as Christians is to go out and reach people. I mean, that is what God commanded us to do at the end of Matthew, to go out and make disciples.
If you'd like to join the conversation, you can find us on social media at Two Pentecostals. That's on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also check our website, twopentecostals.com, for show notes, news, and links to Bryce and I's blogs. Also, it really helps us out if you can go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, hopefully 5 stars, and leave a review. It really helps us get found in the rankings, and we truly appreciate it. See you next time on Two Pentecostals and a Microphone.